You're helping us make a difference. Thank you to everyone who's worked on our advisory board, Devin Del Palacio, Kimberly Gutzler, and of course our incredible and dedicated co-founder and lead volunteer, Art Guthrie. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for these amazing advocates for climate justice and children's rights. And finally, thank you to all the students, teachers, parents, and allies who have come out this week to help us deliver our message to Congress. Act on climate change now. Together, we will go down in history as the generation that saved the world from humanity. So just to begin, Schools for Climate Action is a nonpartisan, grassroots, nationwide campaign with a mission to empower schools to speak up for climate action in order to protect current and future generations. So we help school boards, student councils, and education support organizations pass resolutions that do three things. First, coming from ed sector organizations, the resolutions drive a paradigm shift so that people recognize climate change as a generational justice issue. To elaborate briefly, the climate change is a generational justice issue because it disproportionately affects students, young people, and future generations. Second, the resolutions clearly articulate the political will for all elected leaders, especially members of Congress, to support or enact common sense climate policies. And lastly, they expand and celebrate district responses to climate change. They implement changes at a local level, such as the teaching of climate change curriculum, switching the district to renewable energy and sustainable waste programs. So the first resolution was passed in December of 2017 by the Sebastopol Union School District. And since then, we've worked to pass 64 resolutions in 10 states around the country, in California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, Texas, and Virginia.
Lopez Island in Washington, Lopez Island Unified in Washington State passed one last night.
11 states. We've also passed resolutions on the national level, such as the National Black Council of the National Association of School Board Members. The National Association of School Board Members has passed the resolution through committee and will vote on it shortly. So hopefully we'll have that number up to 66. So we've passed resolutions in Democratic and Republican districts, which proves what the data says, which is that over 70% of Americans believe that we need to take action on climate change. Among my generation, it's over 90%, and this is for two reasons. One, because we know what the consequences are, and number two, we're taking science classes right now. The American people are ready for action on this issue, but unfortunately, Congress is not representative of the will of the American people right now. Knowing this, we realized that we needed to help members of Congress and their staffers better understand climate change as a generational justice and equality issue, and better understand the link between their inaction and the harms to schools, young people, and future generations. Over 3 days, we're hand-delivering sample resolutions to every single member of Congress. In doing this, we hope to help the education sector better embrace our power to break climate justice silence, help move Congress to end their climate neglect, help drive a wider paradigm shift about connection between caring for kids in the country and caring for the climate, and support youth exposed to climate harm to develop resilience by providing a more coherent narrative in a context of action and hope related to our national climate neglect. We're so excited that today around 10 we'll be joined by over 100 middle school students from DC Public Schools. At this time, we ask that all congressional staffers give up their seats because sixth graders don't have the greatest attention spans if they're on the floor. We won't have the space for everyone, unfortunately, so if there's not enough room, then we politely ask for some people to exit. We really hope we can fit everyone. So we have a great lineup with you today. We have student speakers, climate and child welfare experts, and vote and hearing schedule permitting members of Congress. And we just found out that votes are sometime between 10 and 11, which is when our congressional panel is. So fingers crossed. But before we jump into that, let's check in with the first family of Schools for Climate Action, Park, Kai, and Lola Guthrie.
Hi, I'm Lola. I was 8 years old the first time I felt generational neglect. It was after a fire at the Richmond oil refinery, just a few miles from my house. The next day, we returned from a backpacking trip and rushed to the backyard for something fresh and green to eat. I still remember the disappointment I felt when my parents told me that I couldn't eat the vegetables I'd spent the last month carefully tending. They were covered in toxic chemicals. I remember having an uneasy feeling that the adults in charge were not paying attention to the air pollution that had such a negative effect on me. That was 7 years ago. Now my state faces more intense and frequent fires because of climate change. In 2017, the Tubbs fire came within 8 miles of my town. I was fortunate that my house was safe, but 1,400 other students were not so lucky. The scariest part of all this was not the smoke or that Santa Rosa looked like the apocalypse had come, but the fact that Scott Pruitt signed the papers to dismantle the Clean Power Plant. At that moment, I knew this man, in a position of exceptional power, was one of the adults that made me feel like my generation was being neglected. With Schools for Climate Action, we are breaking the pattern of adults neglecting the health and safety of all young people. Thank you.
I just want to sit a moment with the dissonance inherent in this picture. It points to a disconnect between who we want to be in the world and who we are. This picture should offend our sense of who we are as a people right now and move us to be more like the people we want to be and can be. Here's my 11-year-old June in striped leggings, thanking elected community leaders for speaking up to end climate neglect. Kai and Lola, serious, responsible, thinking ahead, taking action to help forestall the very kind of crisis that now rage so close to them. Before I go on, let me give some context about this story. This is in front of the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors office. Kai and Lola were lead advocates to get a climate action resolution passed by the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors. The Sonoma County Board of Supervisors was enthusiastic and asked Kai and Lola to come back to officially receive the gold resolution. In the gold resolution, one of the reasons given for needing national climate action was increased severity of wildfires. We showed up on October 9th to receive the gold resolution. That was the second day of the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa. The masks were not for dramatic effect. The Board of Supervisors meeting did not happen, of course, because they were in full-on crisis mode. And this is a bitterly ironic photo. So Kai and Lola were serious, responsible, thinking ahead, taking action to help forestall the very kind of crisis that now raged so close to them. This spot where we stood was less than 3 miles from the smoldering ashes of homes of hundreds of young people in our county. And on this exact day this picture was taken, perhaps almost simultaneously, Scott Pruitt signed the very first paperwork to formally roll back some of the very same regulations designed to decrease the future risk of just such firestorms. How did we get here? How did we get to this point of bitter irony, this complete inversion of our basic shared norms and narratives about who we are as a people? Here's part of how Kai and Lola got there. They did their due diligence. They knew the threat. They were not playing the victim card. This is us right out there in June of 2017 before the fires. They put on suits and dresses and learned respectful, nonpartisan advocacy and called out the best shared values we have as Americans. They put their faith in our system of governance and their elders and our precious democratic traditions. They engaged in respectful conversations and sought common ground to confront this common crisis. This is us before a meeting with Representative Tom McClintock's office. His office did not seem to accept basic climate science or value even market-based climate solutions, free market-based climate solutions that appeal to people across the political spectrum. He was not interested. 4 months later, how did our nation get here? How did our nation get to this point of bitter irony? Neglect. Congress knew the harm. Congress had the tools to limit the harm. Congress chose not to act. Front page of the Washington Post in 1986. I was just a year older than Kai is right now. That's how old this warning is. Hansen and other scientists said the evidence of warming trends is overwhelming. How did we get here? We got here because we neglected to value the warnings. 12 years later, 2008, 11 years ago, and still Congress knew the harm and had yet to act. 2015, 7 years later, Congress knew the harm and failed to act. Some thought it was funny. Neglect, failing to protect a child from physical and emotional harm and danger. Congress has failed to act. This is neglect. Congress has known the harm for decades, has had multiple policy tools available to help it prevent harm. Congress has simply chosen not to act. It has, and through Congress we have, neglected our students, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. This is not who we have to be as a nation. We have done great things before. We have had the hard and difficult conversations. We have looked at the difficult, painful truths as a nation. We have learned and grown thanks to honest, courageous, and yes, painful self-examination. This history of climate neglect does not have to be our enduring legacy. The 116th Congress can break the pattern of climate neglect. I yield the floor to the gentleman from the younger generation.
So I just want to paint a picture of what it's going to look like for this neglect to end. And so I want us to try to visualize where we want to go. Our educational leaders will view climate change's harm to our youth in a way that is in line with reality. They will recognize climate change impacts on the lives of their students, and thus they will be compelled to speak directly to Congress, the people with the power to organize a national response on the scale that is necessary. When leaders consider the needs of the younger generation, decisive climate action should be the first thing that comes to mind. Not only shall the climate crisis weigh heavy on the minds of our leaders when they think of us, but this shall be reflected in their actions. The combined voices of thousands of student councils, school boards, parent-teachers associations, educators' unions, and other educational institutions explicitly calling on Congress to act on this generational justice issue will help to counteract the magical thinking, for that is what it is, the magical thinking that is so widespread in Congress. The myth that it is possible to care for children well and serve our nation well, all while choosing inaction on this most devastating issue. If members of Congress accept their own power to prevent harm to young people and future generations, then they will design and implement bold solutions to the climate crisis that match the magnitude of both the crisis facing us and the greatness inherent within all of us. Realizing this vision is the work before us. Thank you.
All right, thank you to the Guthries. Now we're going to move on to our first panel entitled Climate Burden, the Effects of Climate Change on U.S. Youth and Schools. We're fortunate enough today to be joined by some student and child welfare experts as well as some student leaders who are willing to share their personal experiences with climate change and climate-caused disasters and their work with Schools for Climate Action. It's again co-sponsored by Young Voices for the Planet, a project of Young Voices on Climate Change, a 501c3 organization. The mission of Young Voices for the Planet film series is to limit the magnitude of climate change and its impacts by empowering children and youth through uplifting and inspiring success stories to take an essential role in informing their communities and society at large, challenging decision makers and catalyzing change. They document youth speaking out, creating solutions, and leading the change. This section of our event will be moderated by Lynn Cherry, the founder and director of Young Voices for the Planet. Lynn is an author illustrator of 30 award-winning children's books, including the bestsellers The Great Kapuk A River Ran Wild. Lynn received a BA from Tyler School of Art, a teaching degree from Temple University, and an MA in history from Yale University. She has many residencies, including Princeton, Cornell, Smithsonian, the Marine Biological Lab in Woods Hole, University of Massachusetts Amherst, InStar at the University of Colorado, and the NASA Goddard. Her awards include the Metcalf Fellowship and the Brandwin Prize. His academic writings include a chapter in Written in Water, published in National Geographic Books, a chapter Kids Can Save Forests in Treetops at Risk, and a chapter Teaching Climate Change with Hope and Solutions, Lessons from a Film Project, and a recent book, Education in Times of Environmental Crisis. So I'd like to bring up Lynn Sherry.
Really up. Nice being a tall person for once. I'll fall over. So, okay. So, as Jonah just told us, that this is a solution. And what we at Young Voices for the Planet have been doing for 10 years is making films about young people who have solutions. So some of the solutions are, for example, 3 9-year-old girls whose town had a law prohibiting solar panels on town buildings. So these 9-year-olds testified at their town meeting, and they said, "Do you love us? Do you care about us? We want a renewable energy future." And they got a standing ovation, the law was overturned, and that town then put solar panels on every public building. Then the kids lobbied for solar panels on their school, they got that, and then they got an array at the town landfill. Now there's no stopping them. They understand that democracy it works if we all participate. That's what this was. It was an exercise in local democracy. So all of these stories are like that. There's one about a boy, Felix Finkbeiner, who at 9 years old learned that trees sequester carbon. He started planting trees. It went viral. He's now planted 1 billion trees through his Plant for the Planet organization. And he's just just started school in London. So the young people, they grow up and then they don't change, this becomes part of them. And so when I learned about what the Guthries were doing, I was really, really excited because I thought this is a really big systemic change that young people can be instituting. And it's bringing together the generations, it's bringing together the young people who are talking to the school boards, and then the school boards are talking to the Congress, and it's everybody working together on this really viable solution. And as we've seen, it's really picking up steam. The more people know about it, the more they go to their school boards, and the more pressure we have on Congress. So I think this is really going to work. And I'm so grateful that all of you are here today, and I think you'll be really excited by the panelists we have. And I also wanted to thank Jonah for helping put all this together and for being such a great master of ceremonies. Thank you. Okay, thanks. So our first expert presenter, our first speaker, is Azan Nattar, who's a senior at High School in the Woodlands, Texas. He worked with his school's student council to pass a resolution, the first in the entire South. He specifically works with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to further the conversation on climate. He'll be talking about his experiences during Hurricane Harvey and his hope for a future of bipartisan climate cooperation. So Azan, you want to come up to the panel?
Our 4 panelists.
Hello everyone. How are y'all doing?
Good.
So my name is Hassan Natar. I am from the Spring Woodlands area. My dad, a little guitar is right there. Say bye. So I'm a high school senior that goes to high school high at the Woodlands. I'm a dual credit student that goes to Lone Star College Montgomery. My dad and I went through Hurricane Harvey. Our home, we survived luckily, but we have a lot of friends and family that got impacted. My dad was walking around Rayford Road, and there were just apartments, homes, and businesses that were impacted. We were just horrified. People had to go walk to the grocery store, and the roads were impassable. It was unlike Hurricane Ike, because during Hurricane Ike, the problem was the winds. The problem during Hurricane Harvey was the floodwaters. And while this may have not been caused completely by climate change, the storm was made more intense by climate change. It was more intense, and 1,000-year floods were occurring at a greater rate than my father and I had seen. So it kind of built like a fear inside of us. We are constituents of Texas' 8th Congressional District. It is a very large district. It goes from Rayford, Spring, all the way up to Huntsville, including the Woodlands, Texas, and Conroe. According to the NRDC.org, the natural disaster Hurricane Harvey brought a huge amount of torrential rain that was caused by increasing air and ocean temperature that generated an enormous amount of energy and made it more intense. And like I said before, even though climate change did not cause Hurricane Harvey, it made it stronger and with the greater potential to do more damage than Hurricane Ike and previous hurricanes. About a week ago in Deer Park, Texas, there was a disaster, but this one was caused by humans. There was a petrochemical spill that polluted the air and the water of the community of Deer Park. The fire compromised the health of many Texans through the dispersing of cancerous pollutants in the air. However, there's one thing that did shock and inspired me and gave me hope. In response to the fire, Attorney General Kim Paxton sued the company that was polluting with the petrochemicals, the explosion that caused like many schools to be shut down, people to have to go around a detour. And they violated the company for violating the Texas Clean Air Act. And this shocked me because I was talking to my dad and I was like, Dad, this person's a Republican. They say Texas is oil country. But is there hope still for a bipartisan solution where Republicans and Democrats can come together, put away the partisanship, and say, this is a solution that we both sides need to act on. We can do it in a bipartisan manner. And through actions such as this one that Kim Paxton did, that convinced me that climate change is and should be a nonpartisan issue, and one that can gather strong bipartisan support in Congress. All Americans, including me, my dad and I, and S4CA, and Young Voices for the Planet, believe that we need to protect our kids and environment. And we can do this through solutions like asking your congressperson to join the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. It's composed of half Republican, half Democrat, for every Democrat a Republican, and vice versa. And Texas and the rest of the U.S., we can lead bipartisan solutions both at the national level and the state and local level. And I pray to God that this happens and that the youth, our voice, our world, our planet is protected, because I have many friends and family members that are veterans and they served and protected our country. But I believe now it is up to us, the youth and Congress, to act on the changing climate and protect the world. That is for all of us. This earth is not a Republican earth. It's not a Democrat. It's an earth for all of us, as humanity, as humans, as humankind, mankind. And I pray to God that we all can come together on a solution to this crisis that all of us are facing. Thank you so much.
So our first expert presenter will be focusing on the public health perspective of the issue of climate change. Dr. Natasha Dejournay, PhD, and PH is the research coordinator at the National Environmental Health Association, where she leads research as well as children's environmental health activities. She's a graduate of University of Louisville, where she completed her PhD and Master's of Public Health, both concentrating in environmental health sciences. In her postdoctoral studies, she was awarded a fellowship by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to investigate cardiovascular risks of air pollution exposures. Dr. Desjardins was named 2017 Alumna of the Year for the University of Louisville School of Public Health and Information Sciences, and concurrently awarded designation in the class of 2017 Alumni Fellows. Prior to NEHA, she was a policy analyst at the American Public Health Association, where she led the natural environmental portfolio, including air and water exposures along with climate change. Dr. Desjardins is a member of the Governing Board of Citizens Climate Education. Welcome.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I've been here for about an hour or so now, and I'm amazed by the students, and I'm amazed by your leadership in this movement. And I thank Hazan for what he shared about his experiences in climate change. So today, I'm going to try to go really quickly and share with you an overview of the many ways that climate change impacts health, but focusing in on how children are uniquely susceptible. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my organization. I work for the National Environmental Health Association, and we work to advance the environmental health professional so that we can provide a healthful environment for all. So environmental health professionals are people in food safety, water safety, air quality, vector control, water control. The list goes on, but you can see in all that I named, there are many connections on climate change and health. We represent 5,500 members, and they are in state and local health departments across the U.S., leading in their communities to protect us from environmental health hazards. So I'm going to try to go really quickly, just a little snapshot of some of the work that we've done on climate change and health. We've done a lot of work within our government affairs, and what NEHA has done is advocate that the solution to environmental health problems is to invest in a credentialed environmental health workforce. So to do that, NEHA has helped secure funding for Zika, funding for CDC's Climate and Health Program, and then very recently, funding for CDC's Hurricane Recovery Funding, which allows us to go to U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico to help ensure safe places for children and help rebuild the environmental health infrastructure there. We've received funding from CDC to provide many grants on climate change and health. Through Eco America, we help continue to educate our members on the topic. And I'm really excited to share that we have declared that we will be 100% clean energy by 2030. And we also have, thank you. And we also have a membership committee on climate change and health, and we have released several policy statements on the topic. But the reason that we're here right now is for the children. And that's always the reason for this generation, for the next, and the next, and the next. And children are uniquely vulnerable to environmental health hazards. They have immature and developing organ systems, and exposure to hazards at the wrong time in development can be particularly detrimental to children's health. They're not just little adults. They actually breathe in more air and take in more water per body weight. So they're actually taking in more exposures than adults are. They rely on adults to make decisions for them, and this may leave them vulnerable. Also, they have unique behaviors. They spend more time outdoors than adults. They also may play on the ground. They're closer to the ground, so they take in more ground level pollutants. And then they, especially young toddlers, have hand-to-mouth behaviors where they pick up things from the ground and put them in their mouth. This allows them to ingest certain environmental hazards. And then they can also be exposed through breast milk. And then there are even some exposures that can pass the placental barrier. But when it comes to climate change, children bear a disproportionate burden. The World Health Organization estimates that 88% of the global burden of climate change falls on children that are younger than age 5. That is an injustice. That is why we're here, and that's why we're doing something about it. So I absolutely commend schools for climate action to work to advance this issue and advance action. So I'm going to step very quickly through these different ways that climate change impacts our health. And I'm going to focus in on how children are uniquely vulnerable to these different types of exposures. So we'll start with air quality. Sorry, one of my screens went dark, wanted to make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing there. So with air quality, we have increased carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere, which is trapping heat and pollutants below, much like a blanket traps heat. This is decreasing the quality of the air that we breathe, and this has impacts on our health. So we've got higher air pollution, and that's linked with respiratory conditions in children like asthma. We have warmer, hotter, longer, hotter, warm seasons, and we have more bouts of extreme heat. This also decreases the quality of the air that we breathe and is associated with respiratory health outcomes. We talked a lot today about wildfire smoke. I know there are a lot of people from California that have been facing the detrimental wildfires. Wildfire smoke, because climate change is inducing more drought conditions, then we have conditions that are more conducive to wildfires. And the smoke from those wildfires also is a trigger for respiratory ailments. And then there are several allergens. Climate change is inducing a longer, hotter, warm season. And with that longer, hotter, warm season, we have a longer pollen season. But with the higher carbon dioxide levels, we also have a more intense pollen season. This is all bad news for allergy sufferers. But allergies are more than just a nuisance. Along with respiratory conditions like asthma, they can cause children to miss school. And missing school is linked with long-term health outcomes. So changing gears, I want to share a little bit about how extreme heat, hallmark of climate change, is related to adverse health in children. Heat is actually the top cause of natural weather-related deaths in the U.S. And this is concerning because climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme heat events. So that's increasing children's risk of heat-related illness like heat stroke, as well as, heat exhaustion, and then also could lead to deadly heat strokes if they're not attended to medically quickly. And then can also, once again, as I said, increase the children's risk of respiratory diseases. Now, extreme heat, we must be concerned about that when it comes to children because, like I said, they spend more time outdoors, so they're more likely to get these extreme heat exposures. But these exposures their health is quite sensitive to this exposure. Regarding extreme weather, climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity with which we experience extreme weather. Because climate change not only warms our surface temperatures, but it also warms the temperature of our surface waters, as Azan shared before. We witnessed an unprecedented amount of major hurricanes that made landfall in the U.S. in 2017 with Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Irma, and also Hurricane Harvey that Azan shared his detailed account from. These photos here are also from Hurricane Harvey and showing some of the youngest, smallest victims of the storm. Children are especially at risk in extreme weather because they are dependent on, many are dependent on adults for their health and safety and well-being. But they're at risk for injury and illness, and potentially death in these extreme weather events. But I want to highlight that extreme weather doesn't only harm the physical health of children, it also harms the mental well-being of children as well. And we have a speaker that's going to speak in much more detail on that, so I'll just share a snapshot that it increases anxiety and stress in children and also increases risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as depression in those that survive the storm. Climate causes increases in the extremities of precipitation. So on one hand, flooding, and then on the other hand, drought. with flooding, flooding can overflow our sewer systems and cause untreated sewer or contaminated waters to go into our drinking water supply or our recreational water supply. Children are quite susceptible when exposed to this contamination because their organ systems are still developing. I say they have an immature organ system, and I don't mean their organ system is childish. I mean that their organ system is still growing and still developing and not as able to fight off some of these infectious diseases the way a more mature system can. So climate change then, through exposure to water contamination, can increase our risk of gastrointestinal illness. And there was a study that demonstrated that in over half of the waterborne disease outbreaks, half of them were preceded by extreme rainfall events. And then this also leaves behind destruction in our communities and infrastructure challenges and displacement and even mold behind in our homes to harm our air quality and increase our risk of injury and death. But the other side of extreme precipitation is drought. And climate change has a great impact on our agricultural system where it's decreasing crop yield, but also the increases in air pollution are having an impact on the nutrient quality of the crops that we do have. So it's decreasing the crop yield and decreasing the nutrient value of these plants, and this contributes to malnutrition, and this is being experienced globally. And then I've spoken to you about wildfires and their links with respiratory outcomes like asthma for children. Lastly, and I know I have been Debbie Downer, but there are solutions. There are solutions, so don't be too down. But I do want to share with you the ways that climate change is increasing vector-borne disease. So this warming, longer, hotter, warm season are increasing the amount and the range of disease-carrying insects and ticks and rodents. And that is, they carry vector-borne disease, and that leaves children's health more susceptible because they're smaller in size and because they still have developing immune systems, leaving them more susceptible to vector-borne disease. So some in the U.S. that we're facing are Lyme disease, West Nile virus, and also Zika virus. With Lyme disease, there was a lot of press in the last year that CDC released in their Morbidity and Mortality Weekly report that there's an increase in vector-borne disease in the U.S. When we look at Lyme disease, we're seeing it in places where ticks once weren't able to withstand. We're seeing them in Maine. 20 years ago in Maine, they reported maybe a dozen cases of Lyme disease. Last summer in Maine, they reported about 1,500 cases of Lyme disease. So climate change is increasing the range with which these vectors can grow and thrive. So I'm going to leave you here on this very sad note. But from this, I hope that you understand that the climate change impacts on the health of our children in particular are vast. They're happening now, and there's hope. There are things that we can do, and you're doing them right now. And I am amazed and encouraged by this youth-led movement and amazingly inspired. And I want you to keep up the good work. We need you. Our communities need you. Our schools need you as well. So thank you. And I didn't say thank you to Park in the beginning, and I meant to thank you so much for the kind invitation.
Have a slight change of plans because we have members of Congress here and on their way right now, but they'll have floor votes expected at 10:30. So if it's all right with our panelists, we're going to move away from this panel and we'll come back to you after they have to leave. All right. So thank you to all of our panelists for being so accommodating. And we're also welcoming in our 100+ Washington, D.C. public school middle school students. So we'll invite you.